what you can do to put yourself further ahead over the course of a game. In this video, we'll be covering how you can have map impact by using your split push to help out your team instead. Before heading into our missions, let's familiarize ourselves with some terms that we'll be referencing constantly throughout this video. When split pushing, there's going to be 3 different zones in the side lane that you need to be aware of. Minion waves can be in the collection, neutral, or pressure zones. You and your opponent's game plan will usually revolve around which zone the minion wave is in. If the wave is in the collection zone, you more than likely want to go clear it since it's so close to your tower and you don't want to miss any farm. If the wave is in the pressure zone, your opponent is likely going to be compelled to clear it. And the neutral zone is kind of just the in-between of both of those. The inverse of this will be true for your opponent. If the wave is in your pressure zone, it just means that it's in their collection zone. Likewise, if it's in your collection zone, it's in their pressure zone. And lastly, these zone locations will change based on the towers up in that lane. The collection zone is always near your tower, and the pressure zone is always near the enemy tower, with the neutral zone obviously being around the middle, like in this example. With that out of the way, let's get into our missions. Your first mission is simply to shove the wave as far into the pressure zone as possible. By doing so, you're forcing your opponent to respond and go clear it, otherwise they'll fall behind in farm or take tower damage. Mission 2 is to roam anywhere afterwards and look to do something on the map with a numbers advantage. Remember, you have forced your opponent to go collect the wave. This is your time to look to force a beneficial 5v4 on the map. You can do anything with this number advantage. You can look to force Baron, Dragon, Rift Herald, the team fight for vision control, or just contest a Raptor camp. Regardless of what you're doing, you will be there before your opponent, giving your team the upper hand. So let's talk about why this is good and important to do. For starters, this is a good way to make sure that you maintain high farm. You'll constantly be shoving waves before you group, which will naturally keep you at a high CS score. Secondly, regular split pushing is oftentimes impossible unless you're really ahead. If you try to shove the wave and pressure your opponent, they can usually just clear the wave from safety of their tower. And finally, this promotes predictability in your games. By doing this, you are reliably obtaining a map numbers advantage, which can only be beneficial for your team. Rather than applying these strategies, we notice that a lot of players tend to just run down mid when they recall or respawn in base. The problem with this is that you are usually handshaking a teamfight with the enemy team. This is horrendous for improving or climbing elo. If both teams are just fighting mid 5v5, you're literally just playing Yahtzee. There's no strategy and it's going to be a 50-50 as to who actually wins the fight. So let's look at a prime example of this tactic being used. Here we see Kennen take the first tower and immediately shove the following wave, forcing his opponent into Gangplank's collection zone. He then proceeds to recall, buy items, and then teleports bottom to help out his team. As Kennen proceeds to win every lane on the map with his roam, we can see Gangplank was predictably stuck in top lane, having to catch the wave, and was helpless in preventing this. After all of that, Kennen is still able to walk back top to catch the wave in his collection zone since he pushed it so far into the pressure zone. Gangplank had no time to even get into Kennen's tower. So obviously it won't look like this most of the time. While you can go on solo adventures to win the game, you'll typically be grouping with your team to get something done together. Let's watch Splice's Vizichachi apply this strategy on Aatrox. We see him push a wave into the pressure zone, which allows him to take the Krug camp uncontested because Sylas is forced to farm the top wave. But he soon notices that no one is collecting in bot lane, so he recalls to go collect that farm himself. Making sure to push the next wave as well to pressure the bot lane tower. With the knowledge that someone is likely going to go bottom, he moves up in the river to assist with the Kiana kill. Then, once his team gets confirmation that Sylas is indeed bot lane, they continue to brute force a fight with their numbers and pick up another kill. If you paid attention, you'll have noticed that for the past 2 minutes or so, Sylas has been unable to impact the map at all. Vizichachi's continued shoving has forced him to spend most of the time reacting and clearing waves. This is why this strategy is so consistent and powerful. there's likely an immediate question that you may be asking yourself. What if your opponent just disregards the wave and groups instead? Well, in that case, your opponent is just missing farm. If they're continually grouped, you could start pressuring towers by split pushing normally, or honestly do whatever you want. As long as you're shoving waves into their tower and they aren't picking them up, they'll fall incredibly far behind. Another consideration to keep in mind is to not be results oriented about this strategy. For that, let's watch a replay from Gen G's Cuvée. We see him apply this strategy and shove the wave, then start moving towards his team in the mid lane. Unfortunately, when he collapses to fight, both Gangplank and Lissandra teleport, meaning that this was just a straight up 5v5. Despite the fight being lost, it doesn't mean that his play was incorrect. Coin flip fights are always going to happen in solo queue. It's better to have shoved in the wave denying farm before the fight happens than to immediately go and fight. Before this play though, Cuvée made another important decision. We can clearly see Kai'Sa pushing the wave into Cuvé's collection zone, yet he opts to walk to Dragon. Pushing and then collapsing takes time, and if a fight is imminent around an important objective, you should likely just start heading there immediately, especially if your teleport is down. You may miss the wave, but it's obviously way more important to be there in case a critical teamfight breaks out. As you can probably figure out, the push and collapse strategy is highly dependent on side wave control. You can't really shove in your opponent if you can't beat them in a 1v1. This is the tragedy of top lane. Champion select is probably the most critical point in the game for you. If you draft an unwinnable matchup, not only do you lose lane, but then you have no side wave control. That just lets your opponent do this to you and mercilessly collapse onto your team, since they can do whatever they want in the side lane. Having side lane pressure and collapsing is probably the most prominent strategy for good top laners. There's a reason that versatile champions such as Kennen, Aatrox, and Akali are so popular in competitive play. They win lane versus a lot of champions, but they also don't really have any terrible counter picks. This means that when piloted by a good player, they can always have some level of side lane control. Matchup knowledge and learning to draft as a top laner is crucial to implement this strategy. Or you can become so good at a specific champion that you can just blind pick into whatever. Champions like Yasuo, Riven, Renekton are sort of like that. They take some skill to pilot, but if you become really skilled with them, you can typically blind pick them into just about anything. If you do find yourself in one of these unwinnable matchups though, for example something like Sion versus Fiora, you'll have to settle for just clearing your collection zone. Otherwise, you'll likely die in the neutral zone to the superior 1v1 champion. Clearing the collection zone will give you a bit of time to group, so use that little bit of time with your superior team fighting champion to try and win the game. Alright, that's it for this video. We highly recommend that you consistently apply this strategy whenever possible, since it is the staple of top lane play. You will for sure have higher impact games and win more games if done correctly. Thanks for watching.